The moment the judge read my name into the record, my brother-in-law's face did something I had never seen it do before. It collapsed. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies. It just sort of fell, like a building losing its structural support from the inside, floor by floor, until there was nothing left holding it up. I'd waited 2.5 years for that moment, and even then, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of holding your breath. Let me take you back to where this actually started, because the courtroom is not the beginning. The beginning is a Tuesday evening in October, at my brother-in-law's house in Oakville, Ontario. The kind of house that has a mudroom, and a wine fridge, and a home gym nobody uses. My sister had just been promoted to director at her consulting firm. My brother-in-law, whose name is Curtis, had called a family dinner to celebrate. There were 12 people around that table. Catered food from a Portuguese restaurant he liked. Good wine. The kind of evening designed to make you feel both welcome and slightly less than. I was 31. I had just left my position at a dental clinic in Hamilton where I'd worked as a billing coordinator for 4 years. At least, that's what my family thought I'd done. My mother kept telling people I was between things. My father, who has always been a man of few words, said nothing, which was somehow worse. Curtis, who had a talent for making observations sound like compliments, raised his glass at some point during dinner and said, "To taking time to figure things out." He looked at me when he said it. My sister touched my arm across the table. She has always tried to protect me in ways that cost her nothing. What nobody at that dinner knew was that I hadn't left the dental clinic because I burned out, or because I was lost, or because I needed to find myself. I had left because I couldn't keep working in a building that was the center of an active federal investigation, and because my covers was a dental billing coordinator who had gotten a little too good at noticing things that didn't add up. I'll back up further. 3 years before that dinner in Oakville, I was finishing a graduate certificate in health administration at McMaster. One of our practicum assignments involved analyzing billing patterns at a set of anonymized clinics across the greater Hamilton-Burlington area. The data was supposed to be clean and straightforward. It wasn't. I found procedures billed to provincial health insurance for patients who had not been seen on those dates. Duplicate submissions under slightly altered patient identification numbers. Billing codes for complex surgical consultations attached to routine cleanings. The amounts per claim were small, each one on its own easy to dismiss. But the pattern wasn't small. Across the clinics I was looking at, the pattern was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. I brought it to my supervisor at the practicum. She told me I was likely misreading the data structure. I brought it to the program coordinator. He told me to make sure I was comparing apples to apples before drawing conclusions. He wasn't unkind about it. He was just very, very careful. I went back to my apartment in Hamilton and sat with it for 3 days. Then I called the Ontario Anti-Fraud Tip Line. 2 weeks after that, I got a call from an investigator at Health Canada named Bernard Ossie. He asked if we could meet somewhere that wasn't my office or my home. I said yes. I didn't fully understand yet what I was agreeing to, but I understood enough. I left the practicum program on paper for personal reasons, stress, health concerns. Curtis told my sister that he'd always suspected I wasn't cut out for healthcare administration, and she told me this because she thought it would make me feel better to know what people were really thinking. It didn't, but I filed it away. Bernard's team had already been building a case. They had a regional clinic network under surveillance, 7 locations across Hamilton, Burlington, and Stony Creek, all operating under a parent corporation called Lakeview Integrated Dental Partners. The majority shareholder and operational director of that corporation was a man named Gareth Hollis. Gareth Hollis was also my brother-in-law Curtis's closest business partner and the godfather of Curtis's eldest son. I found that out 3 months into working with Bernard's team. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on Upper James and called Bernard and told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Does Curtis know what Gareth is running?" I said I didn't know. He said, "We need to find out." That became my job for the next 8 months. My cover held because I was exactly who my family already believed I was. A woman who'd washed out of a graduate program, who was bouncing between part-time work and freelance bookkeeping contracts, who showed up to family dinners a little quieter than she used to be, and left a little earlier than everyone else. Curtis once told my sister that he worried I might be depressed. He offered to connect me with his employee assistance program. I thanked him and said I'd think about it. I want to tell you about the moment I understood how deep it went. It was a Sunday in March, about 14 months into the investigation. My sister had invited me over for brunch. "Just us and the kids," she said casual. When I got there, Curtis was home, which was fine, and Gareth was there too, which I hadn't expected. They were in the kitchen talking when I came in. I heard the word rollover and then a clinic name, Birchwood. The Burlington location. I knew Birchwood. It was the highest volume location in the network and the one with the most anomalous billing patterns in the data I'd originally flagged. I helped my sister set the table. I made small talk with Gareth's wife, who is a genuinely lovely person and who had no idea, as far as anyone could tell, what her husband was doing with his business. While I loaded the dishwasher after brunch, I typed a 4-line message to Bernard on the secure app on my phone. What came back 40 seconds later was, "We've been watching Birchwood since last week. Stay close to this." I stayed close to it for another full year. Here's something I haven't told anyone in my family yet. In month 18 of the investigation, I found out that my father had been doing minor renovation work for one of the Lakeview clinics. He runs a small contracting business. He'd been hired through a referral from Curtis's office to do some drywall and fixture work at the Stony Creek location. Legitimate work, legitimate invoices. But the payments to his company had been processed through one of the shell accounts the Lakeview network was using to move money around, which meant his business name was sitting in a set of financial records that were going to become evidence. I drove to my parents' house that evening. I sat in the driveway for 25 minutes. My father came out eventually, because he'd seen my car from the kitchen window, and couldn't figure out why I wasn't coming inside. He knocked on the passenger window. I rolled it down. He looked at me for a moment and said, in the way he says everything, "You want to come in or you want to sit out here?" I went inside. I had a cup of tea. I didn't tell him anything. Bernard's team had already assessed the situation and determined that my father's involvement was incidental and fully documentable as clean. But I sat across from him at the kitchen table and drank my tea and kept my face very steady, and that was one of the hardest things I've done. I need to tell you about my nephew. He's 7, Curtis's youngest. He calls me by my first name because he can't say it properly yet, so it comes out sounding like something else, and he laughs every time. He doesn't know any of this and won't for a long time. I thought about him more than I thought about Curtis in the months leading up to the arrests. I thought about what it would mean for a 7-year-old to understand. Later, what his father had known about and what he hadn't. Curtis, as it turned out, hadn't known the full scope. He had known some of it. He had signed off on a partnership agreement with Lakeview Integrated that gave him a small equity stake in exchange for client referrals from his other business interests. He'd asked Gareth at some point whether everything was above board. Gareth had said of course. Curtis had accepted that because it was easier, and because the quarterly payments were not insignificant. Whether that constitutes willful blindness under the Criminal Code of Canada is a question that took nearly 4 months of negotiations between the Crown and Curtis's lawyer to resolve. I wasn't involved in those negotiations. I was asked not to be. What I was involved in was 11 days of testimony spread across 2 weeks in a Toronto courtroom the following spring. Gareth's defense went after me in the way these defenses always do. I was motivated by personal grievance. I had fabricated or exaggerated what I found. I was a failed graduate student with an axe to grind against successful people. His attorney used the word resentment 17 times in the first cross-examination. I counted because I needed something to do with my hands under the table. What the attorney couldn't explain was Bernard's team's documentation. 2 years of billing records, patient attendance logs, provincial reimbursement claims, and wire transfers into accounts that trace back to a numbered company registered in the name of a man who had died in 2019 and whose identity had been borrowed without anyone's knowledge. He also couldn't explain the testimony of the clinic's former office manager, a woman named Phoebe Strand, who had raised concerns internally in 2021 and had been quietly let go 3 months later with a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement that the Crown successfully argued was itself evidence of the conspiracy. Phoebe had reached out to Bernard's team on her own. A year before the arrests, she and I had never met. But she had a folder of printed emails that she'd kept in a shoebox in her basement because something had told her not to delete them. When Bernard showed me her file, I cried a little in his office. Not because it helped the case, though it did. Because she'd spent 2 years wondering if she'd imagined it, and she hadn't imagined any of it. Gareth Hollis was convicted on 19 counts, including healthcare fraud, money laundering, and breach of trust. The total amount billed fraudulently over the life of the scheme was just under $4 million. Money that came out of provincial health insurance funds that exist because Ontarians pay into them. Money that was supposed to go toward actual care for actual people. My brother-in-law pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of failing to report a financial crime. He received a substantial fine and a 2-year conditional sentence. He did not go to prison. I don't know how I feel about that. I've been sitting with it for 6 months and I'm still not sure. My sister and I haven't spoken much since the verdict. Not because she's angry with me, or not only because of that. I think she's trying to figure out who she's been living next to. I think she's doing that slowly, the way you do when the answer is going to require you to rebuild something from the ground up. She came over to my apartment 2 weeks after the sentencing. She brought a plant, which is what she does when she doesn't know what to bring. She set it on my kitchen counter, and we made coffee and sat at the table and didn't say a lot. At one point she said, "Did you know it was going to go this far when you started?" I said I'd known it might. She nodded. She looked out the window. "You could have told me," she said. I said no, I couldn't. She sat with that for a while. Then she said, "Okay." That was the most honest conversation we'd had in 3 years. Maybe longer. I've thought a lot about what I could have done differently, whether there was a version of this where I didn't end up in a courtroom watching my sister's marriage take on water in real time. I haven't found one. The thing I found was real, and it was happening to real people. The families who overpaid for procedures that were upcoded to insurance. The patients whose records were quietly altered to justify claims they never knew were being made in their names. A retired teacher in Stony Creek named Gerald Tran, who came to the courthouse on sentencing day and sat in the gallery with his wife. His dental records had been used to submit fraudulent claims for nearly 3 years. He found out when his insurer flagged an anomaly during a routine audit and called him to ask about a procedure he'd never had. He spent 8 months trying to get it resolved. He didn't say anything to me after the verdict. He didn't need to. He just sat there while the judge read the sentence, and when it was over, he put his hand over his mouth for a moment, and then he straightened up and put his coat on. I keep thinking about that, the straightening up, the coat. Bernard Ossie is still my primary contact. We work together differently now. I came on formally with Health Canada's Program Integrity Branch 18 months ago. I run billing analytics reviews across 3 provinces. I look at numbers that are supposed to be boring, and I find the places where they're not. I don't tell people what I did. This is the first time I've laid it out in full. And I'm still not entirely sure why I'm doing it now. Except that someone asked me once whether I ever felt like the silence cost me something. And I realized I'd been answering that question wrong for a long time. The thing I want you to take from this, if you take anything at all, is not that I was unusually brave or unusually clever. I wasn't either of those things. I was a woman in her late 20s who found something she couldn't unfind, and then spent a long time looking like someone who had simply failed to get her life together. The looking like a failure was not accidental. It was the whole point. It was what kept me close enough to see what I needed to see. Curtis sat at that dinner table and told everyone he worried about me. He meant it, I think. In the way people mean things when the meaning costs them nothing. I thought about that dinner a lot during the 2 years that followed. The catered food and the good wine and the toast to figuring things out. The specific texture of being pitied by someone who doesn't know what they're looking at. It kept me very focused.